Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and today we are on the final book of the What Katy Did series, in which Katy appears basically three pages. And also, this particular cover that we are looking at right here is taken from the Kobo eBooks website, as shown in the description below, if you're at all interested. But the edition that I actually read, because I don't own an edition of this, was taken off of Project Gutenberg, which used a version that was published back in the 1890s, and that particular version is a, regular cloth-bound hardcover children's book version such as you would have found in the period. And this makes a much better thumbnail than, that, which is fine. This is a perfectly valid, good cover. I would quite like it myself, but it's not, it's not the world's greatest thumbnail. Anyways, so this story is not about Katy. This is about Clover, but more importantly, this is about Imogen Young and slightly, minimally, tangentially, her brother, Lionel. Imogen Young and Lionel are English people from, I believe it was the Cornish coast, and Lionel has, before the start of this book, at the open of this book, been living in Colorado, in the High Valley, on the ranch that Jeff Templestowe and Clarence Page had been running when we read Clover, or when I read Clover. I don't know if you've read Clover. And so he's sort of bought into the ranch and lives up there, but it was a thing that was frequently done that sisters, unmarried sisters, spinster sisters, would move to live with brothers who were living in remote regions, because that way the brother gets a housekeeper, he gets somebody who knows how to cook, who knows how to run a household, who can darn his stockings, etc., etc. Well, darn his socks, I suppose, since men don't wear stockings. It meant that she would have somewhere to go that wasn't living eternally with her parents. And so Imogen Young is going to be going with her brother to Colorado. And so we have this illustration here of the two of them walking along the coastline, and the thing is that Imogen Young, unlike most of the characters in these books, most of the lead characters in these books, is not described as clever. She's not quick-witted. She's a very dull person mentally. And she is, in fact, highly prejudiced against Americans because, now, as a Canadian, I am, of course, morally obligated to be prejudiced against Americans, but let's be honest, Canadians and Americans are a lot more similar than any Canadian ever wants to admit. But the thing is that prejudice against Americans has existed for a very long time because, of course, people look at those living in what was at the time something of a frontier civilization, and, you expect that they're going to be picking their teeth with Bowie knives and so on and so forth. The English and perhaps even European prejudice against Americans, of course, tends to be amplified because the history of white America is, just a couple of 100 years old, whereas the history of Europe is significantly longer than that. I am not decrying, of course, the Native American / First Nations history. I'm just saying, if you're talking about the history, the Western white history of America, that only starts when people, the Pilgrims start moving in, really. So, you have this concept, particularly, in the 1890s, of this being a very, very young country with no history and a lot of uncivilized attributes. But Imogen basically refuses to believe anything that her brother tells her. When he says, this is a perfectly nice little town, you don't need to bring nails and hairpins and these kinds of things, you can buy them. Yes, it's 15 miles away, but 15 miles is not that long for you to go once a month and get all of these things that you're packing. You do realize we're going to have to pay like 5 times their value in shipping. But Imogen doesn't want to believe this. In fact, as she and her brother are leaving, they wind up in a conversation with 3 Americans. The ever illustrious Lily, who is no longer Lily Page, but is the Comtesse de Conflans, or whatever it was, and her mother, Olivia Page, and a friend of theirs, who has come along and who starts telling Imogen all kinds of tall tales about how they're getting attacked by Indians in New York City, and Imogen believes every word. She believes every word about regular buffalo hunts going right through the middle of 1890s New York, which, as we all know, was a hefty, significant city, which certainly did not have a buffalo within miles of it unless somebody had brought one in for a zoo. But she believes every word of it, and this young woman, when she realizes that Imogen was not merely going along with her, but actually believed her, is forced to apologize and say, no, it's not like that. It's a perfectly civilized city with civilized amenities. There is no need whatsoever for you to, be concerned. And Imogen is shocked. The thing is, she has a great deal of trouble because she thinks of Americans as being all one type, and that all one type is uncouth, loud, and brash. Whereas we all know that if you want uncouth, loud, and brash, you go to the Australians. Or something like that. Anyways, don't mind me. If we're going to talk about stereotypes, I'm going to talk about stereotypes. But the point is that she's taken aback, and she gets taken aback on a very regular basis when we trip over Mrs. Ashe and her daughter Amy, who are American. And she's talking to Mrs. Ashe and was thinking, oh, what a credit young Amy is to our English upbringing, because Amy is a nice girl and polite and all sorts of things like that. And Imogen just assumes that an American is not going to be nice or polite or any of these other things. And the big issue in this is that she, as I said, she's not very bright, and so once these ideas get entrenched in her head, she's not a quick enough thinker, not creative enough as a thinker, to think her way back out of these prejudices without them getting shoved sharply in her face. The other line of prejudice she has is against Clover. And so when they get to the High Valley, she met Clover briefly when Clover came over to England with her new husband Jeff to meet her in-laws. The thing is that Isabel, Jeff's sister, was Imogen's best friend, practically her only friend. And Imogen felt very, very bereft when everybody took up with Clover instantly. And the thing about Imogen is, she's one of those people who doesn't know how to dress herself, like me. That there are people who know, whether instinctively or through learning how to do it, how to dress themselves to best advantage. And Imogen does not. And so between the fact that Clover has learned how to do that, Clover is pretty and fun and different and all of these things, her feelings get very, very hurt by this. And so when she comes out to the High Valley, she is, however subconsciously, determined not to like Clover because she's angry with Clover for stealing her best friend. And even though she's there and Isabel is back in England, she still resents it. Clover, meanwhile, has had a son, little Jeff, and her sister Elsie has wound up marrying Clarence. And so Clover and Elsie are living together in Colorado, and Phil has actually moved out to Colorado and is studying law somewhere. I don't know where the university place is that he's studying law out there, but however. Phil's not really in this book. He's kind of just there in the background as somebody who exists. But Dorry and Johnnie, Joanna, rather, they call her Johnnie. Dorry's real name is Theodore, by the way, which we find out at the end of this book. They're still living with Dr. Carr out, in their hometown near Boston, and they've had children. So little Jeff is Clover's, and the little girl there who they call Phillida, but her name is actually Philippa, is Elsie's daughter. And this is a terrible picture. I mean, that girl looks like she has no neck and no waist. She's just like a head and arms directly attached to the waist. It's very weird. Anyways, they've been raising their children in the High Valley, and they're eager to meet Imogen, but Imogen is, as I said, just resentful of Clover fundamentally. And much of this book is Imogen working through this and Clover dealing with it. But at the end of the book, we get something that I should have expected from the start, but just didn't occur to me. And that is that Lionel has fallen in love with Katy, Clover, Elsie, whatever's youngest sister, Joanne, the last time she was there, and she shows up at the end of the book for a visit, and so does Dorry, because Dorry has become ill from overwork, and so he comes out there for sort of a vacation to recover, and he meets Imogen. And the thing about Dorry that I had forgotten is that Dorry isn't bright. He's, steady, he's stable, he's not stupid, but he's not quick. And Imogen is like that. She's not stupid, but she's not quick. And Dorry finds the perfect girl in Imogen, because as he says when Elsie asks him, I'm delighted you found her, I'm delighted you're happy, it's great that you're happy and that she's happy, and everybody's happy, but why, Imogen? And he says, because I'm not quick like you, and I want a girl who thinks like I do. You're all so fast, you're all so smart and clever, that you're running off with an idea before I've even realized that there is one, he says. But Imogen won't make him run after her. She thinks at the same speed that he does. And it means that, among other things, despite Elsie's exclamation of whatever can they be finding to talk about, Susan Coolidge quite rightly points out that just because somebody isn't a fast talker or a quick thinker doesn't mean that they can't find things to talk about with other people who are like unto them. And it's something that I should have expected at the start, when I was confused as to why we had such a fairly dull character, a dull-witted character, as one of our protagonists. But I should have expected it, but I didn't, and it was a surprise to me. But this was it. This was the thing, that this gives Dorry his happy ending of somebody who is like him, somebody who will be happy with a calm, staid, and stable relationship, who will be staid and unexciting in the same way that he is, and that they fit together, which is always such an important thing. And it makes for a lovely ending to this book, that everything worked out and everybody gets their happy ending. So I'm going to leave that there on a happy ending, and I will see you all next week.